blood on the pristine tablecloth of a Michelin-starred restaurant wasn't how Roman Valenti planned to finalize a $50 million shipping syndicate. But when his translator started foaming at the mouth, leaving him cornered by heavily armed foreign oligarchs, salvation came from the girl pouring the Pellegrino. The private dining room at the Core Club on East 55th Street was designed for secrets. With soundproofed mahogany walls, heavy velvet drapes drawn against the Manhattan skyline, and a strict no-cell-phone policy, it was the perfect incubator for the illicit. Roman Valenti, underboss of the most formidable syndicate operating on the eastern seaboard, adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit. At 33, Roman was a man built of cold calculation and inherited ruthlessness. Tonight's objective was supposed to be simple: finalize a tripartite alliance that would control the incoming freight at the port of Newark. Sitting across from him was Dmitry Koshkov, a brutal and deeply paranoid oligarch representing the Bratva. To Dmitry's left sat Hector Delgado, a volatile lieutenant for the Sinaloa logistics wing. Three massive egos. Three heavily armed details waiting in the subterranean parking garage. And three completely different languages. Roman relied entirely on one man to keep the fragile peace: Simon Croft. Simon was a seasoned corporate linguist, poached from a private intelligence firm, Kroll Associates. He was fluent in Russian and Spanish, a necessary bridge in a room where a single misinterpreted idiom could result in a bloodbath. "Tell Dmitry," Roman said softly, keeping his dark eyes locked on the Russian, "that the Valenti family guarantees the customs inspectors will be blind by Tuesday. He just needs to ensure the manifests are scrubbed." Simon, who had been sweating profusely for the last 10 minutes, tugged at his collar. His face was unusually flushed. "Господин Koshkov," Simon began, but his voice cracked. Roman frowned, glancing at his translator. "Simon, get it together." Simon didn't answer. He reached for his water glass, his hand trembling so violently that the crystal shattered against the edge of the table. Ice and water spilled across the white linen. Before Roman could reprimand him, Simon's eyes rolled back. A choked, wet gasp tore from his throat, and he collapsed forward, his face slamming hard into his plate of roasted branzino. Foam bubbled past his lips as his body was seized by violent convulsions. Silence, thicker than concrete, descended on the room. Then, chaos erupted. Dmitry Koshkov surged to his feet, overturning his heavy oak chair. He roared something in rapid, guttural Russian, pointing a thick, scarred finger directly at Roman. Instantly, Dmitry's two massive bodyguards flanked him, drawing suppressed Glocks from beneath their jackets. Hector Delgado scrambled backward, kicking the table away as he shouted a string of frantic, terrified Spanish. He assumed this was a sweeping assassination attempt by the Italians, pulling a compact Sig Sauer from his waistband and aiming it wildly between Roman and Dmitry. Roman didn't flinch, though his pulse hammered against his ribs. His own guards, Silas and Arthur, had their weapons out in a heartbeat, aiming squarely at the Russians. "Nobody shoots," Roman barked, raising his hands slowly, showing empty palms. "Simon is having a medical emergency." "Dmitry, look at me. It's a seizure." But Dmitry didn't understand a word of English. To the paranoid Russian, the sudden, violent collapse of the only man bridging their communication looked exactly like the first stage of a betrayal. Poison. Dmitry's face was purple with rage as he barked another sharp, definitive order to his men. The metallic clicks of safeties being disengaged echoed sharply in the luxurious room. Hector was screaming in Spanish, threatening to blow Roman's head off if anyone moved. Dmitry's men were shifting their aim to Roman's chest. Roman's mind raced. He had no way to de-escalate. He couldn't speak Russian. He couldn't speak Spanish. He was trapped in a room with $50 million on the table, and less than 10 seconds before the first shot was fired, igniting a gang war that would paint the streets of New York red. He looked at the dying translator, then at the barrels of the guns. He was going to die because of a language barrier. "Shoot the Italian," Dmitri growled in his native tongue, his eyes completely devoid of mercy. "Then we kill the Mexican." Roman braced himself, his muscles tensing for the impact of the bullets. "If you shoot him, Dmitri, you forfeit the shipment and sign your own death warrant with the commission." The voice that cut through the tension wasn't deep or rough. It was decidedly feminine, crystalline in its clarity, and ringing with absolute, commanding authority. It was flawless, Moscow-accented Russian. Every man in the room froze. 6 guns remained drawn, but 6 pairs of eyes snapped away from the targets to the corner of the room. Genevieve Hayes had been standing perfectly still by the serving credenza for the last 2 hours. As a premium hospitality associate at the Core Club, her job was to be invisible. Pour the Petrus, clear the silver, and never, under any circumstances, acknowledge the hushed, violent conversations of the clientele. Genevieve, or Gigi, to the few friends she had left, was not a career waitress. 2 years ago, she had been a senior field linguist for Constellus, a major private defense contractor. Raised by a nomadic diplomat father and a hyper-academic mother, she possessed a rare neurological aptitude for syntax. She spoke English, Russian, Italian, Mandarin, and Spanish with native fluency. But after her ex-fiancé, a mid-level CIA analyst, implicated her in a classified data leak to save his own skin, her security clearance was revoked. Blacklisted by the government and drowning in legal debt, she had traded combat zones for high-end dining rooms, surviving on tips to keep her sick mother in a private care facility. She had understood every single word spoken at the table tonight. She knew Simon had mistranslated a crucial demand regarding the cartel's cut 20 minutes prior, but she had bitten her tongue. But when Simon collapsed, clearly suffering from an acute allergic reaction, likely to the hidden shellfish paste in the branzino glaze, a kitchen error, Genevieve knew exactly what was about to happen. When she heard Dmitri order the execution, her instincts overrode her survival training. "Put the guns down," Genevieve ordered, stepping away from the wall. She kept her hands visible, her black uniform dress swishing softly as she moved into the light of the chandelier. She looked directly at Dmitri, her posture straight, her Russian immaculate and dripping with aristocratic disdain. "Look at the man's neck. He isn't poisoned. It's anaphylaxis. He's swelling. You kill Valenti now, and you walk out of this hotel, straight into a federal task force, because I guarantee his men outside will trigger the alarm." Dmitri stared at her, utterly bewildered. He lowered his hand a fraction. "Who are you?" he demanded in Russian. "I am the person keeping you from making a $50 million mistake," Genevieve fired back without missing a beat. She immediately pivoted to Hector Delgado. She switched to rapid, regional Colombian Spanish, recognizing his specific accent. "Hector, lower the weapon. Roman didn't do this. If Roman wanted you dead, he wouldn't do it in a locked room at the Core Club, where he is on the registered manifest. Put the gun away before the Russians panic and shoot you first." Hector blinked, the tension in his shoulders faltering. "He tried to poison us," he stammered in Spanish. "It's an allergy," Genevieve insisted in Spanish. "Look at him." Roman watched the waitress in stunned silence. She was completely composed, orchestrating the most dangerous men in the Western Hemisphere, like a conductor leading a symphony. "Silas, Arthur," Genevieve said, abruptly switching to sharp, flawless Sicilian Italian to address Roman's guards. "Lower your weapons. If you shoot, you guarantee your boss's death. Lower them, now." The guards hesitated, glancing at Roman. Roman, his mind finally catching up to the surreal miracle unfolding in front of him, gave a short, sharp nod. Silas and Arthur slowly lowered their guns. Seeing the Italians stand down, Hector holstered his weapon. Dmitri, grumbling a heavy string of Russian curses, signaled his men to do the same. The immediate threat of death evaporated, leaving a heavy, adrenaline-soaked silence in its wake. On the floor, Simon was unconscious, his breathing shallow but stable. Roman slowly turned his gaze to the waitress. She was clutching a silver serving tray against her chest, like a shield, her knuckles white, her chest heaving slightly, now that the immediate danger had passed. Her dark hair was pinned back, her eyes wide, realizing exactly whose attention she had just drawn. "You?" Roman said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He didn't point his gun, but his entire predatory focus was locked onto her. "You speak Russian?" "Yes," Genevieve whispered in English. "And Spanish. And Italian." "Yes." Roman glanced at the multi-million-dollar contracts sitting on the table, then back at Dmitri, who was still glaring suspiciously. The deal wasn't done. The night wasn't over, and Roman was entirely without a tongue. He walked around the table, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the shattered crystal. He stopped inches from Genevieve. Up close, he smelled of expensive cologne and gunpowder. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Genevieve." "Well, Genevieve," Roman said, reaching out and gently prying the silver tray from her trembling hands. He tossed it onto a nearby chair with a loud clatter. He gripped her elbow, his hold firm and inescapable, and pulled her toward the empty chair beside him at the head of the table. "You're getting a promotion. Sit down. You work for me now." Genevieve stiffened, trying to pull her arm back. "I'm a waitress. I have to call an ambulance for him." "My men will handle Simon," Roman interrupted, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "If you walk out that door, this room turns into a slaughterhouse, and I lose the port." "Sit down, Genevieve. Translate for me. Do this, and I will pay you enough money to buy this entire hotel." Genevieve looked at the cold eyes of the Russian oligarch, the nervous twitch of the cartel boss, and the unyielding, terrifying magnetism of the Mafia underboss beside her. She knew the underworld. She knew that once you stepped out of the shadows and into their light, you could never go back. But as she looked at Roman Valenti's desperate, commanding stare, she realized she had no choice. Genevieve sat down. She smoothed her apron, folded her hands on the mahogany table, and looked at Dmitri. "Mr. Valenti apologizes for the interruption," she said in perfect, silken Russian. "Now, where were we regarding the customs inspectors?" Roman leaned back in his chair, a slow, dangerous smirk touching the corner of his mouth. The waitress hadn't just saved his life. She had just become his most valuable asset. And Roman Valenti was a man who fiercely protected what was his. For the next 2 hours, the private dining room at the Core Club transformed from a near slaughterhouse into a high-stakes theater of linguistic warfare. Genevieve Hayes didn't just translate, she orchestrated. Roman Valenti was a man of blunt, brutal force. His negotiation style was akin to a sledgehammer, effective on the streets of Brooklyn, but a liability in a room full of fragile international egos. "Tell Dmitri that if he tries to skim the port fees again, I'll personally sink his freighters in the Hudson," Roman murmured in English, swirling a fresh glass of Macallan 18 years single malt, his eyes locked coldly on the Russian oligarch. Genevieve didn't blink. She turned to Dmitri, her posture impeccable, and delivered the sentiment in fluid, aristocratic Russian. "Mr. Valenti wishes to convey that any unilateral adjustments to the agreed-upon port tariffs would unfortunately disrupt the operational harmony we've established, necessitating a severe re-evaluation of our maritime security guarantees. He values the partnership too highly to let administrative errors sever it." Dmitri Koshkov's heavy, scarred brow furrowed. He recognized the underlying threat, but the delivery was wrapped in the precise, respectful diplomacy that the Bratva leadership demanded. Dmitri gave a slow, begrudging nod. "Agreed. The tariffs remain untouched." Roman shot Genevieve a sideways glance. He didn't speak Russian, but he recognized the tonal shift. She was smoothing his rough edges, keeping the volatile Russian from reaching for his Glock again. The real complication arose with Hector Delgado. The cartel lieutenant was sweating through his linen suit, paranoid and twitchy. Roman wants 50% of the inbound logistics. Hector complained rapidly in Spanish, tapping a heavy gold Rolex against the table. My bosses in Culiacan won't accept less than 60. Not with the DEA crawling all over Long Beach. We are taking the primary risk. If we don't get 60, the shipment goes through Miami instead. Genevieve was about to translate this when Hector turned his head slightly toward his own bodyguard, muttering a rapid, heavily slurred phrase in a specific regional dialect of Sinaloan slang. Los gringos ya tienen los números de los contenedores en Miami. Estamos atrapados. The Americans already have the container numbers in Miami. We are trapped. Genevieve's heart gave a slight, sharp kick against her ribs. Because of her past tenure analyzing intercepted narco communications for Constellas, she caught the regionalism perfectly. Hector wasn't negotiating from a position of strength. He was bluffing. The cartel's alternate route in Miami was already compromised by federal agents. They had to use Roman's port in Newark. Under the guise of reaching for a silver pitcher to pour herself a glass of water, Genevieve grabbed a heavy, monogrammed cocktail napkin. With a gold pen pulled from her apron, she quickly scribbled 4 words in English and slid it subtly beneath Roman's wrist. Roman didn't look down immediately. He kept his eyes on Hector, maintaining his intimidating, predatory stare. Slowly, his fingers brushed the napkin. He glanced down. Miami is compromised. Bluff. A dangerous, thrilling heat flared in Roman's chest. He looked at the woman sitting beside him. Genevieve's face was a mask of placid professionalism, her dark eyes giving nothing away. "Tell Hector," Roman said, his voice dropping an octave, practically purring with suppressed malice, "that he will take 45%. Not 50, 45. And if he prefers to route his product through Miami, he has my blessing. I hear the federal agents there are highly efficient at cataloging seized assets this time of year." Genevieve translated the message into crisp, authoritative Spanish. Hector's face drained of color. He stared at Roman as if the Italian underboss possessed psychic abilities. The cartel lieutenant swallowed hard, the gold chains around his neck clinking as he slumped back into his chair. Defeated. 45, Hector mumbled. "We have a deal." By 1 a.m., the contracts were signed. The ink was dry on a $50 million alliance. Dmitri and Hector departed with their respective heavily armed details, leaving the shattered dining room behind. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut. Silence flooded the space, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. Silas and Arthur, Roman's loyal enforcers, stood by the door, completely silent. Genevieve exhaled a long, shaky breath. The adrenaline that had kept her spine steel straight for the last 3 hours suddenly evaporated. Her hands began to tremble. She stood up, her knees weak, and reached for the stack of dirty plates at the center of the table. "I should get back to the kitchen. My manager will be looking for me." "Sit down," Roman commanded. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a physical restraint. Genevieve froze, the plates rattling in her hands. She slowly lowered them and sat back down. Roman leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, studying her with a terrifying intensity. He took in the cheap fabric of her uniform, the exhausted shadows beneath her eyes, and the defiant tilt of her chin. "Silas," Roman called out without breaking eye contact with Genevieve. "Run a full background sweep on Genevieve Hayes. Tear the federal databases apart. I want her life history on my desk in 10 minutes. "You can't do that," Genevieve protested, her voice tight with rising panic. "I can do whatever I want, Genevieve. I just secured the eastern seaboard." Roman tilted his head. "You didn't just translate. You analyzed. You understood Sinaloan street slang. You recognized an anaphylactic response before my own trained security did. And you managed the ego of a Bratva oligarch, better than seasoned diplomats. You are not a waitress. I am currently employed as one, she countered sharply. And I would like to leave. You have a mother, Roman stated, tossing his phone onto the table. Margaret Hayes, currently residing at the Kensington in Westchester. Top-tier memory care facility. Costs roughly $16,000 a month. You are severely delinquent on payments. Genevieve's blood ran cold. How do you know that? I am Roman Valenti. I know the vulnerabilities of everyone in my city. He leaned closer, his voice softening, becoming an intimate, dangerous rasp. You are drowning in debt, Genevieve. You're working double shifts, serving caviar to men who wouldn't spit on you if you were on fire. All to keep your mother in a gilded cage. You have a skill set that is entirely wasted pouring water. I don't work for criminals, she whispered, though the conviction in her voice was failing. You worked for Constellus, Roman noted, as Silas handed him a sleek iPad with her hastily pulled dossier. Roman skimmed the screen. Blacklisted, security clearance revoked. Suspected of a data leak regarding a CIA operation in Bogotá. You were framed, weren't you? Genevieve looked away, the old bitter wound stinging fresh. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. Because the government discarded a genius. And I am a man who capitalizes on other people's garbage. Roman pushed a leather briefcase across the table. He popped the gold clasps. Inside were neatly banded stacks of $100 bills. $200,000. A signing bonus. Your mother's facility will be paid in full for the next 5 years by sunrise. You will come to work for me, not as a waitress, as my chief intelligence officer and personal linguist. Genevieve stared at the money. It was salvation. It was the end of the crushing, suffocating panic that woke her up at 3 a.m. every single night. And if I say no? She asked. Roman closed the briefcase and pushed it directly in front of her. Nobody says no to me, Genevieve, but I prefer it when they say yes willingly. She looked at the man who commanded empires, realizing that she had traded one cartel for another, but this one, at least, was offering her a lifeline. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cool leather of the briefcase. When do I start? 3 months later. The waitress uniform was a ghost of the past. Genevieve stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her suite at the Baccarat Hotel, adjusting the clasp of a diamond tennis bracelet Roman had sent up that morning. She was draped in a midnight blue Saint Laurent gown, her hair professionally styled in sleek, dark waves. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger, a polished, untouchable weapon belonging to the Valenti crime family. Her life had become a dizzying whirlwind of private jets, encrypted satellite phones, and shadowed boardrooms in Geneva, Macau, and London. Roman hadn't just employed her. He had integrated her into the very nervous system of his empire. She read the foreign ledgers his accountants couldn't decipher. She sat silently in on high-stakes negotiations with Sicilian traditionalists, picking apart their lies through the cadence of their regional dialects. And through it all, Roman was her constant, suffocating shadow. He was a terrifying employer, ruthless and unforgiving to failure. Yet, toward Genevieve, he exhibited a fierce, almost obsessive protection. When a French arms dealer had made an off-color remark to her in Marseille, assuming she was just high-priced arm candy, Roman had severed the man's distribution lines overnight, costing the Frenchman millions. You look tense. A deep voice rumbled from the doorway of the suite. Genevieve turned. Roman stood there, devastatingly handsome in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo, his dark hair neatly swept back, his dark eyes tracing the line of her silhouette with an intensity that always made her breath catch. The chemistry between them was an undeniable, terrifying undercurrent. A live wire neither had formally acknowledged, but both constantly tripped over. I'm reviewing the dossiers on Lucas Meyer, Genevieve said, turning back to the table where several encrypted tablets lay. The Swiss banking regulations have tightened. If we don't structure the offshore shell corporations exactly as I outlined in the translated briefs, the federal authorities will red flag the Newark revenue. Roman crossed the room, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. He stopped right behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. He reached out, his large, calloused hands gently resting on her bare shoulders. A shiver raced down her spine. "The money is secondary tonight," Roman murmured, his thumbs lightly tracing her collarbone. "Tonight is the autumn gala at the plaza. It is a show of force. The 5 families will be there. The mayor will be there. You just need to stand by my side, smile, and tell me who is lying." "Everyone is lying, Roman," she replied softly, leaning back infinitesimally into his touch. "It's just a matter of what language they choose to do it in." He chuckled, a dark, rich sound, and pressed a brief, lingering kiss to the crown of her head. "Then you will translate the lies for me, mia cara." An hour later, they descended the grand staircase of the Plaza Hotel into a ballroom dripping in crystal chandeliers, orchids, and the smell of old money and fresh deceit. The room was packed with the elite of New York politicians, rubbing elbows with Wall Street wolves, all of whom were unknowingly brushing shoulders with the apex predators of the criminal underworld. Genevieve stayed securely at Roman's right side, a glass of champagne in hand, her mind working at 1,000,000 miles an hour. She translated the hushed, rapid Mandarin of a shipping magnate near the ice sculpture, confirming to Roman that a shipment of illegal microchips was delayed. She deciphered the Neapolitan Italian of a rival boss, confirming that the Moretti family was planning to aggressively expand into Valenti territory in Queens. She was in her element, an invisible spider at the center of a massive web of intelligence. Until the web tore. Roman had stepped away for precisely 3 minutes to speak privately with an appellate court judge in a secluded alcove, leaving Genevieve near the grand piano. "You always did look stunning in blue, Gigi." The voice hit her like a physical blow. The champagne glass nearly slipped from her fingers. She spun around. Standing there, holding a tumbler of scotch, was Bradley Harrison. He hadn't changed in 2 years. He still possessed the same all-American, golden boy, good looks, the perfectly tailored suit, the sandy blonde hair, the charming, easy smile that had thoroughly dismantled her life. Bradley, the mid-level CIA analyst who had sold classified intel to the highest bidder and manipulated the digital trail to ensure his brilliant, naive fiancée, took the fall. Genevieve's blood turned to ice. "Bradley, what are you doing here?" Bradley took a slow sip of his scotch, his eyes sweeping over her expensive gown, the diamonds at her wrist, the undeniable aura of power she now projected. "I could ask you the same thing. The last time I checked, you were serving overpriced fish to trust fund kids and drowning in legal fees. Now, you're the prized lapdog of Roman Valenti." "Keep your voice down," Genevieve hissed, glancing around frantically. If Roman saw them, if Roman knew who this man was, the ballroom would turn into a war zone. "How did you get in here?" "I don't work for Langley anymore, Gigi," Bradley said, stepping closer, his smile turning predatory. "Private sector pays better, specifically the Moretti family." They were highly interested in the sudden, miraculous efficiency of Roman Valenti's international logistics. Imagine my surprise when a source confirmed that Roman's new secret weapon was my disgraced ex-fiancée. Genevieve took a step back, her mind racing. The Morettis, Roman's most vicious rivals. If Bradley was working for them, he had access to her entire constrained history. He knew about her mother. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to maintain her composure. "Roman is vulnerable tonight," Bradley murmured, closing the distance until he was invading her personal space. "He's exposed. The Morettis are making their move on his territory, and they want him crippled. You are going to give me the account numbers for the Swiss shell companies holding the Newark port revenue." "I don't have them," she lied smoothly, her linguistic training kicking in. Bradley's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist tightly, his fingers digging into the delicate skin near her diamond bracelet. "Don't play games with me, Gigi. I ruined your life once without breaking a sweat. I can do it again. I know exactly where Margaret is staying. The Kensington is very secure, but accidents happen to old women with dementia. Give me the accounts, or I will ensure you lose everything you have left." Panic, pure and blinding, seized her throat. He was threatening her mother. She opened her mouth to speak, to negotiate, to stall. "Take your hand off my property." The voice was low, devoid of any shouting or theatrics, yet it sliced through the ambient noise of the gala like a scalpel. Bradley froze. He slowly turned his head. Roman Valenti had returned. The Italian underboss wasn't flanked by guards. He didn't need to be. The sheer, suffocating menace, radiating from him, cleared a 10-foot radius around them. Other guests instinctively backed away, sensing the sudden drop in the room's temperature. Roman's eyes were locked on Bradley's hand, gripping Genevieve's wrist. There was no anger in Roman's expression, only a dark, bottomless promise of violence. "I won't ask twice," Roman said smoothly, stepping into the space between them. Bradley, relying on the false confidence of a man who didn't truly understand the underworld he had just entered, smirked and let go of Genevieve, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Just catching up with an old friend, Valenti. No harm intended." "Genevieve," Roman said softly, not looking away from Bradley. "Translate a message for me." Genevieve rubbed her wrist, her heart hammering against her ribs. "He speaks English." "Roman." "I don't care," Roman replied, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Translate it into Russian, the Bratva dialect, the one they use before an execution." Genevieve swallowed hard. She looked at Bradley, seeing the sudden flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. She switched to the harsh, guttural Russian she had used that very first night. "The man standing before you," Genevieve translated flawlessly, her voice echoing with chilling precision, "is a dead man walking. He has touched what belongs to the Valenti family. He has 3 seconds to run, or his blood will ruin the marble floors." Bradley didn't need to speak Russian to understand the translation. Roman's hand had already slipped beneath his tuxedo jacket. The golden boy of the CIA turned pale, took one look at Roman's dead eyes, and shoved his way through the crowd, fleeing toward the exit. Roman didn't pursue him. Instead, he turned his full attention to Genevieve. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing over the red marks on her wrist left by Bradley's grip. "Who was that?" Roman demanded, his voice laced with protective fury. "The man who framed me," Genevieve whispered, a tear finally betraying her composure and slipping down her cheek. "And he's working for the Morettis." Roman's jaw clenched. The revelation settled over him, the puzzle pieces clicking into place. A rival family was weaponizing her past against her. He pulled her against his chest, right there in the middle of the crowded ballroom, hiding her face in the lapel of his tuxedo. "The Morettis just made the last mistake of their miserable lives," Roman vowed quietly into her hair. "Nobody touches what is mine. We are going to war." The armored Maybach tore through the rain-slicked Manhattan streets. Inside the soundproofed cabin, the civilized veneer of the gala had vanished. Roman Valenti, his tuxedo jacket discarded, was meticulously loading armor-piercing rounds into a Sig Sauer P-226. He was no longer the polished businessman. He was an apex predator, preparing for war. "Talk to me, Genevieve," Roman commanded, his voice a low, lethal vibration. "Where is he?" Genevieve's fingers flew across her encrypted laptop, bypassing security protocols using ghost node architecture she'd memorized at Constellus. "Bradley isn't just a rogue analyst. Working for the Moretti family means he has tactical resources. He wouldn't threaten my mother unless the wheels were already in motion." A stream of intercepted data flooded her screen. "He's using old Langley encryption habits, a localized burst transmission." She ran the alphanumeric string through a decryption key. "It's Pashto." He's using his Afghan deployment language, so your Italian soldiers won't understand the radio chatter. Translate it, Roman demanded. Target package at White Plains secured. Awaiting extraction. Burn the room. All the blood drained from Genevieve's face. Roman, they're already at the Kensington. They have my mother. The Maybach's engine roared as the driver pushed the heavy vehicle to over 100 miles an hour. Roman covered her trembling hands with his own, forcing her to meet his dark, unyielding eyes. Your mother is not going to die tonight, Roman stated with absolute certainty. I anticipated that Morettis might look into my new chief intelligence officer. I didn't know about Bradley, but I knew you were my most valuable asset. I have 4 of my most lethal operators from Palermo stationed inside the Kensington, posing as maintenance staff. They will hold the line. Genevieve stared at him, stunned by the sheer depth of his possessive foresight. He had fortified her life without her even knowing. The gates of the Kensington, a sprawling memory care facility, had been violently rammed open. As Roman's motorcade skidded onto the driveway, percussive cracks of suppressed gunfire echoed through the rain. Roman kicked his door open. Stay in the car. No, Genevieve grabbed his sleeve. They are communicating in Pashto and Sicilian slang. Your men don't speak Pashto. You need my ears. Roman saw the fierce determination in her eyes. The waitress was gone, replaced by a queen of the underworld. He pressed a compact Glock 43 into her hands. Keep right behind me. The opulent reception area was a war zone. Roman's shadow detail had pushed the assault team back toward the east wing. Genevieve grabbed a tactical radio from a fallen Moretti hitman, pressing the earpiece in. They're trapped in the hallway outside room 412, she whispered, staying low behind a marble pillar as Arthur provided covering fire. Bradley is ordering them to breach the windows, but they're pinned down. A brilliant, dangerous twist formed in her mind. She pressed the transmission button. She didn't use Pashto or Russian. She perfectly mimicked the gravelly, aggressive cadence of a high-ranking Moretti capo she had analyzed weeks ago. Abandon the objective, Genevieve barked in flawless Calabrian. Valenti's main force is sweeping the rear exit. Fall back to the main stairwell immediately. It was a blatant lie. But the Moretti hitmen didn't question it. They broke their defensive line, abandoning Bradley to rush the stairwell, straight into the waiting crossfire of Roman's operators. The ambush was merciless and swift. Roman stalked down the hallway, Genevieve tight on his heels. Outside room 412 stood Bradley, frantic and trembling. Realizing his men had abandoned him, he dropped his weapon as Roman stepped out of the shadows. Wait, Bradley choked out. We can negotiate. I have federal contacts. Genevieve, Roman said quietly, his eyes dead. Tell him what his life is worth to me. She stepped forward, her voice icy. Your translation is simple, Bradley. You are worth absolutely nothing. Roman fired once. The suppressed shot was a quiet whisper. Bradley collapsed, lifeless. Roman opened the door to room 412. Inside, Margaret Hayes lay deeply asleep, entirely oblivious to the war waged for her life. Genevieve let out a choked sob, her adrenaline fracturing. The Glock slipped from her fingers as she stumbled. Roman caught her, pulling her out of the room and pressing her against the hallway wall, shielding her from Bradley's body. His hands framed her face, wiping away her tears. It's over, Roman swore, his voice a fierce whisper. Nobody will ever touch you again. Genevieve looked up, seeing the ruthlessness that made him a monster, but the devotion that made him her savior. You started a war with the Morettis tonight. I would burn the entire city to ash before I let anyone take you from me, Roman replied rawly. You aren't just my translator. You are mine. The tension that had simmered for months finally snapped. Roman kissed her, desperate and consuming, tasting of rain and absolute truth. Genevieve kissed him back with equal ferocity, surrendering entirely to the dark empire she had conquered with her words. Genevieve Hayes had traded the crushing weight of a shattered life for the dangerous embrace of the underworld's most feared king. She was no longer the invisible waitress pouring water for monsters. Standing beside Roman Valenti, she had become the undeniable voice of an empire. In a world built on violence and silent betrayals, he possessed the power, but she held the words that ruled them all.